Hi friends, Krista here. Thank you so much for stopping by Books and Jams. It is time to tell you about the things that I read in the last half of the month of May. I did do a mid-month wrap-up in May where I talked about 5 books that I was reading and how I felt like things had been slowing down a little bit. But I think things picked up quite a bit for me towards the end of the month. I have 7 books that I'm going to talk about today, actually 8, because I did forget one that I had read in the first half of the month. But the books that I talked about at the beginning of the month are Flashback, Keeper of the Lost Cities, Book 7, Small Great Things by Jodi Picoult, Fairy Godmothers Inc. by Sarah Anna DeWild. I talked about They Called Us Enemy by George Takei, a graphic memoir, and My Fine Fellow by Janique Cohen. But the book that I forgot to mention that I did read at the beginning of the month was Left Neglected by Lisa Genova. I picked this one up because it has a direction word in it, and one of Books and Lala's Buzzword Books Challenge prompts, I forget which month, had a direction word, and so left is the direction word. But in this book, we follow this woman who gets into a car accident, and the resulting injury is that her brain does not recognize the left. Anything that's on the left, that went right for you probably, but anything on the left side, her brain just wouldn't register it. So her whole left part of her body, her left hand, her left foot, her left leg, like she couldn't move any of that. And she couldn't see anything on the left. Her brain just refused to recognize, and it's called left neglect. I'm sure there's a scientific word for it as well. But in this book, we just kind of follow this woman and her life and how this left neglect affected her. It was super interesting just how our brains work and the tricks and triggers that she was able to use to start to train her brain to recognize things that are on the left. This one is not my favorite Lisa Genova, but it was incredibly interesting, and just imagining how this would affect her relationship with her husband, her work, her children, her mother. She did have kind of a fraught relationship with her mother, and the mother came to stay when she was in the hospital for quite a long time after her accident, and kind of forced proximity. They had to deal with some stuff. Lisa Genova always does such a good job of helping me to understand what these different brain injuries would look like and how it affects the people that have it and their families. So I did appreciate it. I was very intrigued, and I gave it 4 stars. I still think Still Alice is my favorite of hers, but she is someone that I'm interested in reading everything that she's written. I don't know that I'm going in any kind of an order. I just have a stack of books here, so we're just gonna go with the stack as they come. It's pretty much the order that I read them, but I was in the middle of this one at the middle of the month, The 7.5 Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle by Stuart Turton. I did this with one of my patrons as a buddy read, and it was super interesting. Such a unique premise and a unique book. I'm sure I've talked about it plenty of times. You kind of know what it's about, but our main character wakes up one day, realizes that he's not the person whose body he's in. And you really learn along with our narrator what's going on. So at the very beginning, you just had no idea. And then this mystery starts to unfold. Our narrator learns that at the end of the day at 11 o'clock, Evelyn Hardcastle is going to die. And it's the job of our narrator. What's his name? Aiden. It's Aiden's job to figure out who killed her. And so each day he wakes up in the body of a different person. It got a little convoluted in the middle. I had to make a list. What day are we on and whose body is he in on that day? It got a little confusing, but it just was very, very interesting. Such a unique premise. I really did like it. There were quite a few surprises towards the end that I didn't see coming. All I can say is that it just was such a unique book. There were a few parts that were a little slow or sloggy towards the middle. And then the end felt like it was wrapped up pretty quickly. So the pacing was just a little bit off for me, but I did give this one 4 stars as well. And I loved reading it with Destiny and kind of talking through things. And I think it's probably best done as a buddy read. So you can discuss things and try to figure things out with somebody else and help process what's going on. But yeah, I did really enjoy that mystery. Then I read the book that was my Patreon book club book for the month of June. Nope, May. And that was The Silent Sister by Diane Chamberlain. I think I gave this 4 stars, but as we were talking about this in our book discussion, I'm like, isn't really 3 stars. One of Diane Chamberlain's strengths for sure is her storytelling ability. She captivated me with this story, even though I didn't really like any of the characters and actually was really frustrated with a lot of the characters. In this one, we follow Riley, who at the very beginning of the book has to go kind of clean out her dad's house because her dad has just recently passed away. Her brother is there and he's kind of a hermit, living off in the woods in a trailer, doesn't really like to connect. And we just start to learn about what their life was like as when they were kids. So it turns out her older sister was accused of killing her violin teacher and was in the process of going through the trial when the sister committed suicide, supposedly. And all of these family secrets start coming out. People who were involved with the family back in the day that you just didn't know. All the side characters were annoying. all the main characters were annoying. And annoying in that I did not agree with any of the decisions. I was really frustrated with the dad and the choices he was making. I felt bad for Riley, but I didn't feel like she had enough kind of gumption on her own. She was kind of letting people walk all over her a little bit. There was some pushy neighbors, and this lady who seemed kind to help clean out the house apparently was like a dad's girlfriend or something, but she was really pushy and annoying. It's funny because as I was reading it, I was propulsively turning the pages and wanting to know what was going to happen next. But ultimately, I left feeling like, ugh, that's how it's gonna all come together. I don't know. I didn't love it, but it was a very readable read. So I'm gonna give it 3 stars. I don't know what I gave it on Goodreads, but I think it deserves 3. That's The Silent Sister. Definitely not my favorite Diane Chamberlain. Definitely my least favorite Diane Chamberlain that I've read so far. After The Silent Sister and all of those kind of heavier, thought-provoking books from the first half of the month, I totally changed gears, and my next 2 are a lot lighter. I listened to the audiobook of Dear Mr. Knightley by Catherine Ray. One of my goals in 2022 is to read all the books that I own of hers, which I think might be all of them. And so I just found this one on Scribd and I just decided to listen to it. In this one, we have a college student who has grown up in foster care, currently is living in an adult home for those who have aged out of foster care. She has been granted this scholarship of sorts to a journalism school from this mysterious benefactor named Mr. Knightley. One of the requirements of receiving this scholarship is that she has to write him weekly letters letting him know how things are going at school. It is an epistolary novel, and I really like that. And most of the time, we're just having Samantha, her letters to Mr. Knightley. Every once in a while, she gets a response from his secretary or something like that, assistant. It was cutesy, predictable. Along the way, we meet some of the people that she meets at school, some of the other professors and students and guest speakers. She kind of has this crush on this author and his works. She ends up getting to meet that author, which is pretty cool. It was light and fun. This was a reread for me. I had read it before and I gave it 3 stars again this time. That's what I gave it last time, and that's what I gave it again this time. It was okay. It is Christian fiction, I should say, as well. So there are faith elements towards the end, but it's not heavy. It's not super heavy on the faith elements that I can remember. And then I did read a romance, Isn't It Bromantic? This is by Lyssa Kay Adams, and this is one of my NetGalley books that I was able to check off my NetGalley list. This is the 4th in the Bromance Book Club series. This is another one where, like the first book in the series, the main couple of the book are already married. They have come to the United States from Russia. They got married in Russia right before moving here and yet never really had a real relationship. They were super good friends when they were growing up, but then things changed and then they moved to the States, never really lived together as a married couple. She went off to school in Chicago. He plays hockey in the Nashville area, I believe. And so they never really had a real relationship, but he has loved her always and saved himself for her and kind of was hopeful that things could change and wanted to have a real marriage with her. A lot of the frustration is that it was all based on lack of communication, which is super frustrating. But I do love this group of men who read romance novels to learn how to be better husbands and men for their wives and women. So I do think that that's kind of funny. They've since developed really strong friendships, and they push and challenge each other and also support each other in the tough times and in the good times. I just really love this group of friends. I think that they're really good to read about. I don't know. I thought that this was a really fun read. But then we had a book that I read because it's one of my 5-star predictions. So I'm not going to tell you my actual rating, but I read The 100 Years of Lenny and Margot by Marianne Cronin. In this story, we follow 17-year-old Lenny, who lives in this terminal ward in the hospital. She kind of knows the way all around the hospital. She, at the very beginning, makes her way to the chapel, which is a place that she hasn't been yet. She kind of wants to know the whole hospital building. So she develops this friendship right away with the chaplain, the father who works in the chapel, and really asks some deep questions and challenges his faith as she's trying to think through and process her own life. And I loved that friendship between Lenny and the priest. There's a new art program for hospital patients, and Lenny goes into the art room and meets Margot there. And she ends up loving to go to this class for the older people rather than the one for her kids, for people her own age. Lenny and Margot just develop a friendship as well and decide that they're going to create a piece of art for each year of their life. And along with that, they tell each other stories from their past. Margot is 83 and Lenny is 17. So by the time they're done, they're going to have 100 pieces of art that tells their story, and they will have lived 100 years. I'm not going to tell you much more than that. I will say that it is well worth your read. You will have to wait until my 5-star predictions wrap up to find out my actual real nitty-gritty thoughts on it and what I rated it. But I did read that one. And I have 2 left. I forgot that I also read Before the Coffee Gets Cold, which I put on my June TBR, but I ended up reading it towards the end of May. It was a relatively short book. I listened to it on audio. It's written by Toshikazu Kawazuki. It takes place in Japan somewhere. There's this coffee shop that's kind of a downstairs coffee shop, so it's rather dark and dim inside, always has the sepia tone look to it. There's a family, a husband and a wife, and I think another woman who run the coffee shop. And we meet a couple of different characters who come into the shop as regulars. And we learn that there is one specific chair in the coffee shop where you have the ability to travel back in time. There are quite a few rules attached to this time travel, including the fact that you can't leave the chair. You've got to stay in the chair. So you've got to travel back to a time in the coffee shop. You can only time travel once. It is a well-loved book, and I thought it was very creative. I did not connect with it as strongly as many others who have read it. I did think it was creative. I gave it 4 stars. I liked it, but I didn't love it. I did just think it was super unique, but it didn't grab me in any kind of emotional way. It's almost like short stories, because there are 3 or 4 or 5 different people who do time travel in the chair. As it ends, there are some connections that get made between some of their stories, which I thought was pretty cool. So I did think it was creative and worth the read, but I didn't love it as much as I know a lot of other people really loved it. So there's that. And then finally, I have a 5-star read that I read right at the end of the month, and I will have a video coming out where I sit and actually read this. A read with me of Lightfall, The Girl and the Galdurian by Tim Probert. This is a graphic novel, fantasy middle grade, which was so cute. I loved it. A little bit of an adventure. We follow Bee, who is the granddaughter of a pig wizard, and she is out collecting things. He makes tinctures and tonics for people in their land, and while she's out collecting some ingredients for him, she meets a Galdurian, and she thought that they were extinct. When they get back to the house, Grandpa is gone. And so she is determined to go find her grandfather. However, Bee also struggles with some anxiety, and I loved how that was depicted in pictures and words, what would happen to her as she froze up when she was getting anxious, and how this Galdurian friend helped her to work through some of that, gave her the space that she needed sometimes, but also pushed her a little bit to challenge her. And their friendship just developed over the story as they traveled through this land. And it was clearly the first in a series. Oh, I love that there's a map. It's clearly the first in a series because the resolution, there was not a resolution at the end of it. I'm definitely eager to continue this story, but I thought the art and the story, and there was a lot to be said for this book. So I did give it 5 stars. I thought it was lovely. And that is going to wrap up my month. So here are the books that I just talked about. Most of them read in the end of the month. This one I forgot to talk about midway through the month, and also before the coffee gets cold. Pretty good reading month for starting out as slow as it did. I don't think it started out super slow. I just wasn't as much in the mood to read. As always, I would love to hear from you down in the comments. What did you read in the month of May that you really loved? What didn't really work for you? Have you read any of these books? Did you feel the same way as I did about any of them or differently? We can talk about that down in the comments. I really appreciate you taking the time to watch today. It means a lot to me that you're here and spending time with me, and I will be talking with you in another video very soon. Bye.